That button. Look at me, I remember what I'm doing. It's been a while. Hi BookTube. I'm back. I'm sorry I took such a long break. I don't really have an excuse besides that I got really busy with a bunch of other things. So it's almost the end of April, so I should do the March wrap-up, I think. I'm also going to include the April wrap-up, because I only read one book in April. So yeah, March. I read a lot in March, thankfully, to kind of make up for the lull in April. So, I'm just looking at my list over here. In no particular order, because I couldn't remember the order I read them in. I can't even remember if this is all that I've read. I didn't keep track. I'm failing as a booktuber. I'm sorry. Let's just get right to it. Mockingbird Wish Me Luck by Charles Bukowski. If you don't know who Charles Bukowski is, he's a poet. Kind of, I don't know the technical term for what his era or what he did was. I kind of refer to it as like the post-beat era, and that he took a lot of inspiration from beat poets. Yeah, there was just a whole range of poems in this selection. Everything from like him picking up prostitutes to him going to his daughter's dance ballet recital. So yeah, everything is covered in here. And I thought that was very interesting because there were parts where I really didn't like him. And then there were parts that kind of redeemed him again, and I was trying to figure out, you know, how much of what he's pitting in there is true to him, and how much of it is this kind of facade that he pits on. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Then I read a play called Endgame by Samuel Beckett. His name will sound familiar because he did Waiting for Godot. So this was another absurdist play. My take on it was that it was kind of like an old person's home at the end of the apocalypse. So like there's nobody else on Earth except for like 3 old people and their caretaker. And it was funny at parts and interesting at other parts and overall meaningless, you know, Samuel Beckett stuff, right? And I'm also like weaving and stuff because now I'm standing. If you didn't notice, I'm in a new location. I'm all over the place, sorry. So I'm like, I move a lot when I'm standing, so that's why I'm like, yeah. Anyways, then I read The Outsider, which is also known as The Stranger. It's the same book, different titles for some reason, by Albert Camus. And this is interesting. I went in thinking that it would be very much heavily on the philosophy, but there's actually like a good plot going through it. So basically this is about a man who, first off, his mother dies and then he murders a man, and it's kind of about his trial and how he feels about everything. And it's really quite interesting. It's a totally different perspective that I think that most of us would have. Another play I read was Equus by Peter Shaffer. Equus, that play that Daniel Radcliffe did after Harry Potter, where he was naked on stage. That's not why I read it, but that's how I think most people will know it. And it is about what you think it is. But it's about more than that. It's about a young boy seeking psychiatric help. Yeah, really quite interesting story there. And really, like, I really liked the way that it was staged. He made it really kind of easy to kind of visualize, and that like there's not a lot of setting going on, and that the horses are played by people, which I thought would be interesting. I'm pretty sure in the Daniel Radcliffe production there were actual horses, but in the script I read it was not actual horses, it was people. And then I read Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt, which was interesting, because I remember watching the movie years ago when it came out, and the book felt very different, because in the movie we have like a teenaged main character, and in the book she's 10, which changes the dynamic quite a bit. So this is about a family who has found this spring that grants them everlasting life, and they're dealing with that, and they get kind of caught by this 10-year-old girl, and they kind of like kidnap her and explain everything. But it was also very uncomfortable because, as I said, in the movie she's teenaged, but in the book she's 10, and like one of the brothers who's 17 says, come back when you're 16 and drink the water and we'll, live happily ever after. And I was like, dude, she's 10. Like, she's 10 years old. Back off. So that was a little uncomfortable to read that part. But it was okay. I'll just say it was okay. And then I read Erawan, which is how he tells you how to pronounce it, by Samuel Butler, sorry, lots of Samuels on this list. And this is kind of like, if you've read Utopia, it's kind of along the same lines, but it's also kind of the opposite of the values that you'd expect in Victorian times. So it's kind of really a treatise on crime and punishment and how we should treat that. It's really quite interesting. And then I read Flaubert's Parrot, and I loved this. This is by Julian Barnes, and I really did enjoy this. If I still haven't gotten around to figuring out how much about what he says about Flaubert is true. For right now, I'm just taking it on surface value, assuming that what he told us is true. And if it is, this is how I want all biographies to be. Instead of being chronologically told, it was told kind of like thematically, and with some kind of creative nonfiction put in there, I guess we can call it, where he had like a whole chapter told from the point of view of one of Flaubert's lovers. And I thought that was really cool, really interesting way to kind of get to know the author and his works and everything. So I highly recommend. I haven't read anything by Flaubert. I didn't know anything about him going in, and I still really enjoyed it. So even if you don't know anything about Flaubert, definitely read that. I also read Diary of the War of the Pigs by Adolfo Bioy Caceres. And this is an Argentinian author, and this is kind of positing this war against old people. So old people are kind of like ambushed in the streets and tortured to death, and we have the perspective of an old person. But when I say old, I mean the guy's in his 50s, so I was like, you're not really that old. But I guess maybe at that time and place 50 was considered old. Yeah, they thought if you're kind of a useless old man, what's the point of you living anymore? So it was a really interesting look at ageism, and a lot of sexism in there as well, but that's for another video. I also read another play. I read a lot of plays because I was trying to read short books. So Kim's Convenience by Ins Choi. This is a Canadian play. It's now made into a TV show on CBC Radio, and it's quite funny. So, not radio, CBC TV. And I suggest you watch it. It's really close to the play. And it's about this Korean family that owns a convenience store in downtown Toronto, and kind of like their everyday lives. It's really like just kind of slice of life kind of stuff. It's really nice. Then I read Poor Folk by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and this is my least favorite Dostoevsky, and I usually don't like it when people say I don't like it because I don't like the characters, but that was the primary reason I didn't like this, was because of the character. He was very mentally and emotionally abusive, and it didn't feel like there was anything else to the story that would keep me really reading and engaged and want to find out what's going on. So yeah, it didn't really have a lot of redeeming qualities, unfortunately. Yes. Then I read a really interesting book. If you are a fan of Kurt Vonnegut at all, you've heard of Kilgore Trout. It's kind of this fictional author that he writes into a lot of his stories. So I found a copy of Venus on the Half Shell, which is written by Kilgore Trout. But the actual author isn't Kurt Vonnegut like I thought it was originally. It's actually Philip Jose Farmer, who is another great science fiction author. And this book was hilarious. It was fun. It's basically about this last human on Earth goes off on this great adventure. It kind of was like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in that kind of sense. That he's like on this ship just kind of traveling and interacting with the different really weird, strange cultures. It was a blast to read. And I definitely suggest that if you are a fan of kind of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, of Kurt Vonnegut, just to kind of get that Kilgore Trout thing in, that you should definitely read this. Another play I read was The Adventures of a Black Girl in Search of God by Janet Sears. And this is a really interesting play. It's another Canadian play. And it is about what the title says, but it's also about this community that's based off of real events. So, these black soldiers that participated in the Revolutionary War in the States, War of Independence, I think is the technical term for it. They were given Ojibwe land to settle on in Ontario, and it was called Negro Creek. And eventually, like, the community grew, and it became kind of, involved with other communities around it. And I believe it was the 90s that a motion was put forward by the largely white council, I think it was actually all white council, that they were uncomfortable saying Negro Creek and they wanted to change the name of a road. And the community just went like, no way, like the history and everything behind this, we need to keep that. You can't erase that. So it's about that. It's also about loss. It's not a spoiler to tell you, because we find out right in like the first few pages that the main character has lost her daughter, and it's also about like old people doing crazy awesome things. It was really cool to read, and I would love to see this put on, because there's no real set again, but like everything is people. So like there's a scene where they're in the river, and the river is made up of people. So I thought that was really cool, and I was trying to visualize it, and there's some clips online, but like it would be really cool to see that. So I really enjoyed that play. I also read Red Shirts by John Scalzi, and that is a fun book. If you're into Star Trek at all, this is kind of like the story of the people that aren't the main characters, and kind of figuring out like, like there's certain things that happen when us, non-main characters kind of walk off that ship onto the planet, right? It's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun to read. Pretty meta. And then the last thing I read in March was a comic. It's My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emile Ferris. And oh my gosh, I can't say enough good things about this series. Well, it's going to be a series. I'll talk about that in a second. But this comic, so it's about a young girl who's obsessed with monsters and horror movies and all that. And then a woman dies in kind of mysterious circumstances. And she decides to become a detective, and kind of investigate what's going on. And through that she discovers a lot about World War II and the Holocaust and her family and her family's history, and it is really quite like involved, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's so really good. And then the art is cool too, like it's all done on kind of like lined pages as if it's written in a notebook. Just really great. And then it just like, it gets to the end and it like kind of like teases you. It says at the end, because it's a murder story, she's like, it ends with who did it, and then it's like the story stops. And I was just like I can guess who did it, but I don't think you left me enough hints to like really come to a full conclusion. This is really kind of disappointing, and what about this thing that's going on, and this, and I was just like, I was very upset that it kind of ended abruptly. And so I was like, I need to find out, like, I need to know if there's answers. And there's volume 2 coming out September of next year, so I've got to wait a long time to get a resolution to the story that I desperately want to know the answers to. But yeah, I highly recommend you check it out. Maybe wait if you can't deal with cliffhangers, which I haven't done that in so long. I haven't been following like a current series in so long that it's kind of like frustrating to not have the answers right away. In April, I read one book. That's Mort by Robert Rapino. And this is the first book in the War with No Name series. And it's basically about animals who gain sentience rising up against humans. And we follow a cat named Mort and his adventures. It is definitely an interesting. I don't think it's a book for a lot of people. But I definitely, I think you should check it out and give it a try. If that makes any sense. It's just, it feels like at times that it can skip a lot of the action, and talk about it rather than show you it. But it works, if that makes sense. It works for me at least. And the ending, just kind of like the amount of action that you get there, makes up for it. So I'm definitely going to continue with that series because they're all out. I don't have to wait. So yeah, that's my March and April wrap up. Thank you so much for sticking around after I didn't upload for quite a while. Thank you.